All right, we're going to get started since we're right at 11:45, and we hope to incorporate some action and activity with you all. So we want to make sure we save enough time for everything. My name is Daryl Jackson. I'm the Winston Howard Professor of Law at the University of Wyoming, and I'm going to act as moderator and kind of start some of the dialogue. We have some initial questions that are going to get us started, but our goal is to incorporate you all as quickly as possible. We know that this is the last session of the entire conference, and folks are like, let me go. And so to help get you less likely to say, let me go, we want you to be part of this. So we're going to bring you in just a second. We're going to ask you, after I go through the first round with them, we're going to ask you, everybody here, to introduce yourself. You got like 30 seconds to a minute to introduce who you are, where you're coming from, and what your primary research, scholarship, your agenda is. What are you focused on? Like, what do you think about the most? So if you want to take a few seconds to write that down, just know that we're coming to you next because we want to involve you in this. So with that, I am going to turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves, where they're coming from, and they're going to start to primarily answer one question to begin with, and that's what this panel was built on, the idea that we're going to explore how CRT's core tenets, recognition of structural racism, intersectionality, interest convergence, and racial realism can guide strategies to resist and dismantle fascism. That's what we're going to start off with as our core jumping off point. And with that, I will turn it over to Professor Ellis.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Y'all get involved. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Atiba Ellis. I am the Laura B. Chisholm Distinguished Research Scholar, Associate Dean, and Professor of Law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law in Cleveland. My answer to that question, well, first of all, I write at the intersection of critical race theory and election law, the law of democracy. So my concern is one about the extent to which we have a democratic state, which is not much, and maybe in form, but truly in function, no. But how those structures, to the extent that they exist, encounter these questions. And my answer to this is that specifically, I see election law as kind of different in as much as the Voting Rights Act is explicitly and was consciously created as a manifestation of the remedy that was contemplated in the 15th Amendment to actually address this moment of racial authoritarianism, right? So we live in a racial authoritarian state that is coded as such. The VRA was supposed to be the patch on that coded problem of racial authoritarianism in terms of the mechanisms of the democratic process. But over the last 20 years, we have seen the decline and fall of the Voting Rights Act, Shelby County v. Holder, on the one hand, and Louisiana versus Calais, which was just argued before the Supreme Court last week, on the other. And so what I want to talk about in more detail in a little while is what that means and how that we as critical theorists can recognize the problem for what it is and how that leads us to use the tools in terms of strategy and development, as DJ said.
Professor Mahwade.
Thank you. My name is Professor Reteli Mahwade. I teach at FAMU. I'm a professor of law at the FAMU College of Law. That's a professional name for the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University College of Law in Florida. We're located in Orlando. The law school is in Orlando. Most of the rest of it is in Tallahassee. Anyway, I teach and write on constitutional law issues. I teach constitutional law, administrative law, race and the law, which on the first line of the syllabus it says this is a course in critical race theory. And then teach education law seminar. My research is on constitutional law and with an emphasis on fundamental rights as obligations or duties, which is to say that I focus on positive rights that flow from the U.S. Constitution. And most of my work regarding positive rights under the Constitution focuses on the right to public education. I've also focused at different points on the right to public safety, as well as, and from there I go into my view on Second Amendment gun rights, and then also I've touched a little bit on the right to health care at different points. My view on the role of our work, as I focus on education, my view on the role of critical race theory is that in this moment we need to be reminded about how fundamental education is, both to what I framed as the liberty and democracy components to human dignity. So what I plan to talk about a bit more is the fact that these current attacks on critical race theory, which they're using as a boogeyman. Let's be straightforward about that. Critical race theory is being used as a boogeyman. Everyone here knows that CRS. Everyone here in CRS knows that critical race theory is not something you can easily teach a kindergartner. So what they're really concerned about with is foundational knowledge about the truth. And I'm going to suggest to you that any meaningful concept of freedom, to fulfill any meaningful concept of freedom, liberty, or any meaningful concept of democracy, self-governance, self-actualization, and everything that goes into the concept of democracy, you must first have some form of education, some access to knowledge. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with this, and I believe that, well, I'll just leave it at that. Pass the mic.
All right. So I'll try to be relatively short. I'm Christian Sundquist. I'm a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I almost said Albany Law School. But just an inside joke. I left Albany Law School for Pitt about 4 years ago. And my focus is pretty broad in terms of my research interests, to be honest. It really focuses on how technology, think about that very broadly defined, can influence our, political and social understandings of the meaning of race, right? The meaning of racism, and how technology can reinforce structures of racial oppression. So that's generally what I focus on. Much of my past research critique the use of racialized DNA evidence being admitted against criminal defendants, primarily on the grounds that it resurrects this 19th century style race science and biological understanding of race, which directly feeds into one of the hallmarks of fascism, which I think we'll get into a little bit later. My current research is a bit different in the sense that I'm examining the right to protest and how that right has always been unevenly distributed across racial, gender, class lines, and in particular looking at the rise of AI-based predictive protest policing systems, many of which have been in use here in Los Angeles, California, but throughout the country. Basically the notion is how those systems work is they scrape millions of data points from social media. They analyze that using particular racialized assumptions about what constitutes a likelihood that a protest will become violent, requiring a militarized police response. Then they send alerts to police departments that at least have bought this particular software that this protest is going to happen at XYZ here, it's likely going to be violent, and so forth. So that's what I'm really focusing on, and in particular how those algorithms can embed racial bias, of course, into its code, but also create self-fulfilling prophecies of violence that undermine our right to protest, that chill speech, that chill assembly, and so forth.
Okay, and I'll wrap it up. Again, my name's Daryl Jackson. I'm the Winston Howard Professor of Law at the University of Wyoming College of Law. And our discipline, our scholarship, our research all kind of intersect in that, like Areto, I mix a lot of education, and my PhD's in education. So I mix in this idea of how CRT has interacted with the law, with how it interacts with the education system. And we had a little bit of discussion about this. I can't remember if it was a plenary or a concurrent, where they showed a picture of the jail and this picture of the lockers in the schools. And essentially that was a replication of how much the prison complex system is replicated in the school system. And so my research has largely looked at that through a variety of different lenses. And when we decided we were going to talk about fascism, I think one of the things we talked a little bit about as an analogous word would be authoritarianism. And you see a lot of that in the school structure. So a lot of my research has looked at kind of how the school structure replicates that, how the authoritarianism is replicated in the school structures. And most recently, Professor Ellis and I taught a class for Widener's law school that was called Policing the Police. And it helped us dive deeper with students on how we might come up with methods and techniques and ideas for what it looks like to police the policing structure. And so my part of this dialogue is really going to go to the theme of this whole conference: think, teach, transform, and I would add the idea resist. So largely I'm going to talk about kind of how this class and my research now more currently on ethics and morals and how that looks in this kind of regime, with whether it's policing or prosecutors. That's what I'm going to kind of discuss with regards to the theme that we laid out. So now what we'd like to do, and this grew quickly from where we...
This group doubled.
Right. It was, when we started at 11:45, it was 10 people. We're like, oh, this will be easy to do. And by the time we finished at 11:57, it was quite a bigger group. But we don't want to stop doing it because we said we were going to do it now. We'll hold true to who we are. But instead of like a minute, now you have 30 seconds. And for those of you who walked in afterwards, the folks that already know and they've got it down, they're going to be a little bit of a step ahead. We said we're going to ask each of you, because we know this is the last session. We know you all are like, hey, you are just this far from getting out of here. We want you to introduce yourself, say where you're coming here from, and what your research or scholarship really focuses on. So we can talk about this as a intersectional analysis. So again, you're down to about 30 seconds now because the class keeps growing. But in like 30 seconds, a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, and your scholarship, research, and how it kind of intersects with this theme that we laid out. I'm just going to start from the left and go all the way to the right.
Okay, my name is Kelly Lytle Hernandez. I'm a historian based here at UCLA, and I study race, immigration, and the carceral state.
My name is Gunicinda Espinosa. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota in sociology, and I study how amicus briefs influence the justices at the Supreme Court in racial inequality cases.
My name's Eileen Nguyen. I'm a plaintiff civil litigation attorney for a firm in San Mateo County.
I'm Ahilan Arulanandam. I'm a professor in the law school. I do immigrants' rights litigation a lot. I'm really interested in the connection between authoritarianism and what's happening in the immigration sphere right now.
I'm Yolanda Vasquez. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati, and my work is on the way in which crime and immigration policies shape race and racism.
Carrie Rosenbaum, University of San Francisco, and Sam.
I'm Rashaya G. I'm a visiting assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Law School, and I study the expression of democracy in a racialized state.
I'm Jessica Dixon Weaver. I'm a full professor at SMU Dedman School of Law. I write at the intersection of family law, race, and gender, and currently doing research on enslavement and the influence on the family law canon.
Leo Yu, I'm an assistant professor of law at the University of Massachusetts, and I focus on critical race legal studies and also Asian American and the law.
I'm J. Paul McDonald. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Hawaii's Law School, and I focus on restorative environmental justice for Indigenous peoples.
Hi, I'm Alvin Padilla Avironi. I'm a professor at Villanova School of Law, and I research the relationship between U.S. constitutional law and colonialism.
Kimberly Crenshaw. I teach here at Columbia as well. I've been thinking and writing about the racial contours of American fascism.
My name is Donna Young. I'm the founding dean of the Lincoln Alexander School of Law in Toronto at the Toronto Metropolitan University. I was Christian's colleague for a long time at the Albany Law School before I moved home to Toronto to found a law school that I think has as its mission to embed issues of critical race theory into everything that we do.
Peter Halewood, also professor at Toronto Metropolitan University and also a former colleague of Christian's. I work in international trade law, human rights, among other things.
Hi all, I'm Isaac Young. I'm a 2L here specializing in critical race studies. I'm currently taking the critical race theory class, so I'm required to be here and you'll hear me typing away. Don't mind me.
I'm Daniel Keel. I'm a professor at the University of Memphis, Humphrey School of Law. I do race and education.
Good morning, Laboni Hawk. I'm a civil rights lawyer and I have my own law practice here in Los Angeles. I knew I had to do introductions. I might have chosen a different panel. Good morning. My name is Jin Hee Lee. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Legal Defense Fund.
My name is Andrew Twinamasiko. I am the Director for the Center for Health Law and Policy at the O'Neill Institute for National Global Health Law at Georgetown. And my academic focus is on anti-Black racism and health justice.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wahini Ampofo-Anti. I'm based with the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional Law at the University of Johannesburg, and I focus mostly on racial redress measures and attempts to dismantle racial redress. Yeah.
Hi all, my name is Mark Hakame. I'm an immigration attorney in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. Wait, that's amazing. I'm also in Chicago. My name is Dimitri Nesbitt. I'm the Civic Planning and Design Manager for the Center for Racial and Disability Justice at Northwestern Principal School of Law in Chicago. That's so long to say every time. But yeah, I'm an urban planner and urban designer working in sort of this reparative urbanism sort of space, reparative planning space, as well as climate adaptation, mitigation sort of space as well.
Morning, my name's Kate Caldwell. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Center for Racial and Disability Justice with Dimitri. And my work really focuses on making sure that when decisions are being made, they're centering the voices of those who are going to be impacted the most and the hardest by them, especially when it's an issue about their lives and livelihood.
Hello everyone, I'm Justin Hansford. I'm a law professor at Howard University and I focus on issues like movement, lawyering, free speech, and reparations in the law.
And just got Marcus Garvey a pardon.
No posthumous pardon.
Previous president, not this president. Just want to clarify that.
Hey everybody, I'm Chauncey Smith. I'm an associate director at Catalyst, California. I oversee our Reimagine Justice and Safety program. At the heart of my work involves running systems change campaigns to improve the lives of low-income communities of color. A lot of expertise in police reform issues and building out equity and care-centered approaches to community safety.
Amy Rona, I am a macro social worker from Portland, Oregon. I work for Portland Public Schools. Appreciate the education focused, really focused on the sort of non-curriculum side of the house. I work a lot around disproportionality and helping kids stay connected, students stay connected to school, making sure our processes and protocols do that. And I, in the evening, am in the Master of Legal Studies program here at UCLA remotely and applied to the program because of CRT.
Hello, my name is Gabe Sanders. I'm a 2L here specializing in CRS and public interest law and policy. Hoping to be a public defender one day, but right now I'm doing some research specifically focused on the disproportionate use or implementation of and enforcement of university policies cracking down on protest and kind of which group specifically that's targeting.
Hi everybody, I'm Deanna DeGennaro. I'm a lecturer at Berkeley Law and I teach property.
I'm Mike Sinkoff. I'm not a scholar. I'm an alumnus of UCLA Law. I'm here to meet my continuing legal education requirements.
Hello, I'm Henry Eberhardt. You see him pronouns. I'm a 1L here. I'm interested in tribal law, so want to be an attorney for Native nations.
Hi, Chris Kwok, graduated here in 2000. I came here because Kim Crenshaw I read her work in undergrad, and I was like, I gotta go to where she teaches law school. I work as a mediator and arbitrator. That's my full-time job. But I do community organizing and Asian American sort of advocacy in what really counts.
Just quick introduction of who you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Layla. I'm also a CRS alum, class of 2019, and I now work in reproductive justice issues at F1 Howell.
Hopefully, did somebody else come late? Oh, okay. You snuck in, nice.
Hi there, Ade Jackson, 2019 graduate of the CRS program here at UCLA Law. I work at the Inner City Law Center doing eviction defense and also writing. So, yep, great to be here.
Hopefully this also provided some opportunity for connections that you might not have had before. When you said Chicago, I'm like, that's part of our goal in this whole forum. I hate to say, community's big for all of CRT, but it's especially big, I think, in a lot of our research. And when I am loath to even talk at all about intersectionality with someone in the room, like there's just no way. You're wrong. There's no way. For me, a big part about thinking intersectionality is interdisciplinary as well, right? Like this idea of all of us have these different skills and talents and backgrounds, especially that brought together, we can do more than we can do in our own silos. So hopefully that helps spur more than what I just saw in Chicago with others as well. So what I'm going to do is start us off with a question. The goal is, as the question gets dialogued with them, you all will say you have your own questions. We don't want to wait till the end and be like, we've got 4 minutes left. Anybody got questions? Hurry up, get them all in at one time. We want this to be a dialogue with all of you throughout. So I will start the process with a dialogue. But as you come up with your ideas, thoughts, questions, whatever, please jump in and add to it. So the first question we're going to start this off with is, how can CRT illuminate the ties between America's racial history and modern fascist strategies? And I'm going to start again with Professor Ellis.
So I think the short answer from where I come from to that question is that, and I want to say something very specific. In the oral arguments in Louisiana versus Calais last week, where the Supreme Court was considering how to balance the Voting Rights Act with the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, you saw a reimagining of the purpose of the act to accord with a vision of malignant colorblindness that is designed to self-sabotage the act and leave it a shell of itself, which is consistent with what this court has done in Shelby County v. Holder a decade prior, where it effectively did the exact same thing. You still have the act, but its larger purpose of creating a remedy to address what Derek Bell calls democratic domination, as in black folks were promised a right to vote, and then for 150 years, that promise of the right has kept getting subverted time and time again, right? That we are still continuing that. So to kind of broaden out in this lens a little bit, right? The title of this panel alludes to authoritarianism, and specifically, I want to point to a kind of racial authoritarianism that most of us in this room, as connected to CRS and CRT in some way or another, understand as read, right? America is a racial authoritarian state based in colonialism and the sort of reinvention of levels of subordination, implementing the political economy of slavery. And by the time of Dred Scott, you have an explicit caste system being implemented specifically in relation to Black Americans. Now, I don't have much time because DJ is going to poll you all for questions in a minute or two. But, to answer one of the themes that we've been talking about, right? I want to answer this by historicizing it, right? The Reconstruction Amendments were in large part about undoing Dred Scott, where Black people were literally named as property, right? And to shout out Cheryl Harris, who snuck in the corner, right? Whiteness as property teaches us about, among other things, that political economy. And so the 15th Amendment was passed in order to correct that, as well as to implement the very selfish reconstruction Congress's need to preserve itself, because they knew that the redemption was coming, at least explicitly politically. And the long lesson of American history is, if the redemptionists can't win at the ballot box, they try to win in the legislature, they try to win in the courts, and if they can't do any of that, they go blow up your house, right? And they kill your people, right? And we saw that through the redemption into Jim Crow. We saw the legalization of the caste system in America in terms of race and democracy, with cases like Williams versus Mississippi, which instituted the poll tax, Giles v. Harris, where the Supreme Court said, we ain't going to help y'all. You're on your own. If Alabama wants you black people to vote, they can answer that political question for themselves. So you have this racial authoritarian state, but the Voting Rights Act was about undoing that, guaranteeing that what the 15th Amendment was supposed to do would actually get done through Section 2 and Section 5 of the Act. Section 2 basically restating what the Fifth Amendment said, no discrimination on the basis of race in voting, and Section 5 saying those of you with a history of discrimination in race and voting and lagging indicators about whether your minorities in your state can vote, well, we're going to control your laws until you do better. And then we have to see that you've done better before we release this pre-clearance process. That latter process was undone with Shelby County v. Holder. And the point I want to make about that is John Roberts told a new history about race and politics in America, talking about the South has changed. The South had improved enough. All he looked at was the fact that black people were running for office and black people were voting more than they were voting in 1982, which was the last time they amended the Voting Rights Act substantially. Justice Ginsburg in dissent lays out how that is a shallow reading of history, and I have called that a post-racial reading of history. Right? Race has improved enough, therefore we don't need to talk about it anymore. Therefore, we have to admit to the dignity of the states in measuring what the Voting Rights Act is supposed to do. Dignity of the states echoes back to the original Constitution, which is meant to carry out that political economy of slavery that I was talking about a minute ago. So you end up undercutting the Voting Rights Act, not by overruling Section 5, but cutting out Section 4B, which was the metric for which states would get covered under this preclearance in Section 5. And so you see the Roberts move of, we'll leave a shell of it, but it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do anymore. Flash forward a decade or more later to Louisiana v. Calais. Now, everybody thought in 2023, well, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is going to be okay when it comes to redistricting, because in Allen v. Milligan, the court said, Robert's opinion, stare decisis. But that was a begrudging opinion, right? Roberts is saying, I'm doing this because I have to. Kavanaugh says, bring me a better case, and we'll consider throwing this out. I mean, he didn't literally say that, but everybody reading the tea leaves read it that way. And so, interestingly enough, that same court hands down Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College, where we see this malignant colorblindness that I talked about earlier, in the sense of a kind of absolutist notion of schools cannot use race in admissions. The remedial purposes are to be skeptical, where everyone who does a formalistic reading of that opinion would say, well, that's confined to that case, and therefore there aren't other, different situations outside of education ought to be treated differently. Clearly, the Louisiana and the Calais plaintiffs thought differently. They saw a vision of colorblindness, especially in the Thomas concurrence, that is about a moral targeting of race as remedial and sort of calling it offensive. So when you listen to the oral arguments, they kept talking about, well, when a state considers race, that's stereotyping, with the implication of stereotyping's bad. That goes against the moral harm that thinking about race does. And kept trying to fit it into different remedies, and I won't go into the technical stuff, but suffice it to say, that's a retelling, which, if you go back to the SFA opinion, is basically turning Brown versus Board of Ed on top of its head, right? That is trying to claim a completely different moral legacy than what Brown meant, than what LDF probably meant when with Brown and the arguments of Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, what they were going after, and the whole broader notion of what Reconstruction was supposed to be about, giving people of color, and specifically Black Americans, a political, social, and economic rights. But now this turns into erasure, as we talked about last night. Now this turns into a retelling of the legacy that is supposed to be about a post-racial, we're past this, we have to give the benefit of the doubt to legislatures. The same legislatures who have been repeatedly sued time and time again and found liable under Section 5 and under Section 2 for the wrongs that they are doing in terms of quashing the political power, and especially with Louisiana, and Alabama before it, of Black voters, right? So it is an undoing and probably leaving a shell and creating kinds of factors like in Brnovich and cases before it, but it's the sort of John Roberts treatment of the Voting Rights Act. And remember, John Roberts started his legal career in the Office of Legal Counsel, in his clerkships, saying, I hate the Voting Rights Act. And so it is all coming home to play out today. I said a lot there, but like we said, we are inviting questions as we're conversing.
Thank you for saying a lot. I learned a lot. My question is, and I agree with you, but I was struck when you talked about how with the VRA and with some of these other structures, they leave the shell in place, even as they make it no longer a functional entity. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about other structures, the First Amendment. You could even say the government itself, they don't just declare we are now fascist, right? You leave the shell of checks and balances and democracy in place, and you don't declare the transition that's being made. You simply change the substance. And I wonder, why is that? Why, for example, Trump, I know a couple of weeks ago, he made a statement. He said, he was talking about nuclear weapons, and he said, well, there are two N-words you can't use. One is nuclear, and you know what the other one is. And people were laughing or whatever. But I started asking myself, why doesn't he use either of those N-words, especially the second one, right? Because it's not as if, say, the Republican-led Congress would create some sort of accountability, or there's no one that would really do anything to stop him from saying, we're just going to go after all the blacks and use the N-word. So I'm wondering, what is the function of leaving these shells in place and having these veneers in place when the substance has actually transitioned to the point where they don't have to leave the VRA shell in place, right? Like they could just say, we now abolish the VRA.
Yeah, and remember, Clarence Thomas has been saying for 30 years, let's just abolish all of it. Yeah. Let's just declare it unconstitutional. That's what we really mean. And in some ways, ironically, I'm going to say this in a section that's going to be recorded, but I actually respect Clarence Thomas for being open about his intentions. Mm-hmm. I disagree with his intentions wholly, but I am, he says the quiet part out loud.
Right.
But why keep it quiet, to kind of slightly reframe your question. Okay. But actually, I love the metaphor of shell, because with a shell, you can hide what's going on. That's right. And the 99% of folks who, with Shelby County, the court said, yeah, but Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is still there, and all these cases and concerns, you can you can bring it there, right? But notice the problem. Section 5 stops problems before it starts, because basically you have to get approval from the federal government if you're one of those covered states to pass your law before you can actually implement it, which means the government gets to examine behind it, and if you don't like what the government says, then you can take it to the courts. All right, that's gone, which means you got to go to litigation. It's the plaintiff that gets put on the foot to complain about it. And then those litigations take hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and years to litigate. And usually the government gets to run an election or two, especially with the Roberts Court, staying all kinds of claims right and left on the shadow docket, right? So yeah, it's sort of sub silentio, allowing it to happen with the plausible deniability of, oh, the structure's still there. You still have your rights. And the other thing is the kind of public shaming of the courts that would come with, oh, we struck it all down. You know, when we can then openly say, you are clearly a racial authoritarian trying to implement a fascist state because you got rid of the law that was meant to prevent racial fascism and served in its time to do so, and also mindful of Reconstruction. And the first time we went through all this, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Force Acts of the 1870s, and the first black people elected to Congress and in state governments, which then all went away with Reconstruction, like that. Right, because the Army was taken out of the South, the Jim Crow legislatures were left alone to do. They had the patina of separate but equal, and therefore the plausible deniability of implementing their racial authoritarian state under the name of equality, right? And it's that historical irony that I think plays itself out again. And to answer your question, understanding it in that way makes the stakes far higher and ought to energize all of us in our political activity, realizing what's really going on.
The description you give of what's happening in voting rights is horrific, and I know it's a story from Shelby County that's gotten worse and worse. I also, my sense, as not being an expert on this, is that the problem of rising authoritarianism isn't only, or maybe even particularly, a problem of the suppression of voting rights, because, well, I don't know, but my sense is, I mean, Trump won the popular vote. I don't know if he would have won the popular vote in the absence of voting rights suppression, but I would have thought so, but maybe that's not true. And also, like, the Senate map is as bad or worse as the House map, and you can't gerrymander the Senate, you know, so it's like, so I wonder if you think that, what you think about or any of you think about the relationship between these two things. It seems like there are people, you know, increasing share of, voters of color, black voters, Latino voters who are voting for this authoritarian and this authoritarian party. And so, yeah, that's kind of my question.
Yeah, my answer to that is, you know, and in a way, why we organized our panel this way with 4 different experts from 4 different fields kind of speaking to the one same theme is in part to say it's a multi-causal phenomenon, right? But in some ways, where I come from is the structuring of districts and, you know, the absence of any check by the federal courts on political gerrymandering, leaving it to be a state-to-state kind of thing. If Section 2 basically becomes nullified, if not in fact, at least with a husk left that will effectively do nothing, leaves it to a kind of state-to-state thing, and then you kind of get this divide metamorphosizing out, right? And, you know, California is still going to vote for the Democrat at the end of the day. Ohio is still going to vote for the Republican. But you then get this fixing that's taking at least the last semblance of democracy out of the hands of the people, because your districts ultimately mean nothing if the politicians can fix what the likely outcome of that district will be, and thus your vote kind of gets washed out. You know, I think, And ultimately, to be clear, my understanding is that Trump won the most votes in the last election, but I want to underscore that it was not the majority of the votes. He was never been elected by a majority of the American people. But, you know, that's okay because the folks, so the argument goes, that's okay because we get the power, trust us, and then we start doing all the abuses that we've spent all weekend talking about, you know. But that's my answer to the question. And in part, what I want to set up to is the kinds of things that get redefined in this context, including the meaning and effects of education and the civic mindfulness that get us to be able to engage effectively.
So let me bring Professor Makwede in, and then Professor Jessica Dixon-Weaver. I know you have questions, so if you could jump off of what he says to add in there and keep it rolling.
All right. So I want to be clear about something. We are in the midst of a long walk away from racial equality. Well, actually, that's the title of my most recent article. Walk away from racial equality. And I think we are walking away.
Just so happens.
It just so happens, yeah. We can go backwards and talk about what's going on right in this moment with the executive orders, including Executive Order 14151, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. We can go back to Trump's earliest executive order from this administration, where he basically, got rid of LBJ's executive order for affirmative action. We can go back to Milliken versus Bradley and the court's role in this. My point is that what we're seeing as critical race scholars, in our study of race in America is, Professor Hansford mentioned leaving the shell up. And I feel as though you were setting up something here. And I feel like what you were setting up was the reality that the shell is always up. There's always this facade of equality. And it's propped up even in the face of, actually, especially by those who don't believe in it. So this is now sort of ties in sort of with the overall theme of what we're talking about. There is a profound critique of liberalism to be had here from many perspectives. I would suggest to you that what we have here is a walk away from racial equality towards liberal equality. Sameness. Let's just treat everyone the exact same way. In other words, we're witnessing a rebirth of separate but equal as a primary driver for this court and for our laws. What do I mean by that? Well, you just go through for a moment. Milliken versus Bradley, as we're walking away from racial equality, sort of upends a lot of what Brown said. By simply making a very small thing, saying an intra-district remedy, they say a remedy to correct for racially segregated schools cannot be done by way of, interdistrict, I apologize. Interdistrict remedy cannot be done between the Detroit public schools and the suburbs. Well, you can't do an interdistrict remedy. Why is that? Well, because you have local control. You have this sort of bizarre local control, state control framework that begins as sort of this neutral, process-oriented sameness treatment. We're going to treat you the same as any other sort of organization. We segment things so much. Or I should say, the court segments things so much. And what's the result? Well, freedom, liberty for the privileged white parents who move to the suburbs. Everyone wants liberty, everyone wants freedom. That's the rhetoric of oppression. There was a school I did a site visit at a couple years back where they had a whole Liberty collection. And at the center of their Liberty collection was On Liberty by John C. Calhoun. This is part of Florida. This is not in Florida.
Okay.
But this is all that's to say is that what we're seeing here is a walk away from racial equality towards a different framing of what equality means. It's not about racial equality. It's about it's an Orwellian framing of equality we're dealing with right now, and that we're marching towards. And I don't think we're running towards it. It's been going on for a long time. It feels very fast right now, but maybe we've been accelerating. I don't know. I mean, Donald J. Trump, our beloved president and dear leader, he's reflective of something. He's reflective of something in the greater society. And that's something, when the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion become wielded as a slur in the context of education, which I believe is essential to freedom, but also separately essential to any meaningful democracy. And the two, I believe, are essential to our human dignity. Certainly as we frame human dignity here as Americans, or here in the United States of America, as people living here. When you have that going on, we have had an obvious departure. But with the continued rhetoric of equality, maintaining a sort of facade, you use facade in any way you want to, whatever definition you want, but a facade, whether it's like the architectural one that doesn't quite stand up quite right, or just something that's just so transparently bogus that it signifies something far more insidious than just basic dishonesty, but an agenda. I guess the long and short of it is I want to just, I want to give some space for Christian to be able, Professor Sunquist to be able to say his piece. But what I really want to get across here is, with this attack on education, with the bans in schools, bans for critical race studies in schools, we're not really talking about critical race studies. We're talking about the same thing we were talking about with the Arizona case a few years back. Ethnic studies. The study of black folks, the study of Latinos, Hispanics, the study of Asians, the study of oppression, the study of racial segregation and oppression. All these things, basic history, before we get to theories about why or if or how things happen, are being barred. And this did not start with Donald J. I mean, DeSantis would be upset if I didn't give him credit for it. I'm going back to Florida soon. We have our Stop Woke Act. We have our Stop Woke Act. Now, from a certain perspective, as a law professor, I can say, well, you know what? My colleague, Leroy Purnell, with the help of the ACLU, filed a lawsuit to stop the Stop Woke Act. We're very proud of that. But when we sit down and talk, we're not too happy about the fact that it only applies to higher education, or the fact that the shadow law casts far further than the actual body of the law. Schools are not complying with the injunction that's currently in place on the Stop Woke Act. Universities are not. And meanwhile, kindergarten teachers are being, I'm gonna be careful how I put this. There's a background going on right now in Florida. Kindergarten teachers and other grade school teachers are being incentivized to attend teaching institutes where they are taught about the benefits of slavery, so they can pass it on to the children they're teaching. This upends all kinds of things in terms of our views, our ideals about education. It makes me question at times whether public education is even any good in a state like Florida, which is sort of the point of a fascist authoritarian regime, to get you to question foundational, fundamental, democratically valued institutions. So I'll just pause and stop there and take any questions or comments, or we can just move straight on to Christian.
Professor Weaver had one that she was waiting, so I want to get back.
I had a question about the power of migration on political power. I guess I'm seeing that we're moving towards a states' rights situation. And if that's the case, I know there's some, Charles Blow and some other folks have talked about, moving back to the South or moving to particular states so that we could become the majority, and then taking over those legislatures, those school districts, so that we have at least local and state power. And we have seen that has happened in various cities across the country over the last, I would say, 25 years. Atlanta, all the cities in Texas. I'm in Texas. All the Texas cities are blue, but the rest of the state is red. So if we're becoming a minority, majority or a majority minority country by 45. Why can't we migrate to the states where we can become the majority and run those states?
We'd be happy to have you, just.
I guess if you don't mind, I'll add something that comes to mind immediately. 'Cause I was born and raised in Chicago. Y'all here in California already know that the administration doesn't really believe in states' rights. They believe in their power. And I think we talked about this before at some point, something along these lines at some point, but see also Tulsa, right? I mean, there is no hesitation, or the Wilmington massacre, right? That lie that was told about Wilmington. Anyway, long and short of it is, there's nothing neutral here about their framework. I mean, this is a time for, and I think this is one of the challenges that the current power structure has. They have actually embraced, I think was spoken about yesterday evening, they have embraced a lot of CRT critiques, which means that there is a popular understanding of the level of hypocrisy going on here. So when they say that, okay, well, we believe in states' rights, and then they send the National Guard to my hometown and claim that there's violence going on over there, when this is like, I mean, even Kanye's not rapping about the violence in Chicago. I mean, what's really going on? I think it becomes so transparent that it begs the question. It begs the question. You can leave the question for you, but it begs the question.
Can I add to that just real quick? Notice what's also happening on the state level when the national, right, California has followed suit with Texas to do mid-district redistricting, and Ohio's getting into it. Indiana tried to get into it, but they didn't have enough votes today. And notice those in power will re-scramble the lines to protect their power. So if a whole bunch of people showed up, it wouldn't surprise me if there was like a racial or political gerrymander to even try to undo that. When all the rules mean nothing, then it's about naked power.
I'm going to head to Professor Crenshaw next. I want to add to that, the multidisciplinary nature of this whole group is one that I think helps answer that question too, right? Because in education, you're seeing what good states' rights have in education, because we'll cut your funding, right? Whatever money you have, we're going to take it away. We got universities, higher ed, we're all in filing for billion-dollar contracts, right? They got the $1 billion in the line. Are you going to agree with it? Are you going to disagree with the White House? And so, as much as we might want to get states' rights, I think the different disciplines we're all involved in are suggesting that states' rights are going to fall too much in the national power. Professor Crenshaw.
So I apologize in advance. I meant to tip out a little earlier to see some of my former students, but I just am loving this conversation. So I'm going to ask something and then leave pretty soon. Whatever you say is not the reason I'm here.
We're honored you're here.
You're here.
So first of all, congratulations for surviving Florida. Special gratitude for your being here. So I agree with absolutely everything you say. So the one thing that puzzles me is the overall framing that you started off with to describe this moment as one where they're pushing us back to separate but equal, but sameness, right? I would say that was last generation's conservative movement, right? To push us back into a sameness frame, formal equality, blah, blah, blah. I think what's happening now goes more to the framing of this whole panel. This is racial fascism. Racial fascism isn't about sameness. It is about fully embracing the idea that there is a pariah class, an internalized enemy, a group of others that we can legitimately subordinate as a way of generating consent among all the others. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by creating a mythic past, as Jason Stanley writes about in Propaganda, how fascism works, and now erasing history as a way of creating a fascist state. So when I look at what they're doing from erasing history, to reintroducing scientific racism. What they're about is using racism to destroy all public values, to destroy public institutions. So it's not about black schools and white schools anymore. It's about getting rid of schools and taking and redeploying those resources and knowing that they have an endless account of ideological resourcing, which is racism, that they can deploy to that end. So, you know, the quiet part, as you guys are saying, is not only saying it out loud, it's on loudspeaker, it's on blast. So I think everything you're describing is more consistent with they've given up the pretense of separate but equal. It's worse than that now. It's we said it, we mean it, and now we're going about doing it, and y'all can't do anything about it to stop it. And so that would be my challenge to the framing of every excellent thing I think you're pointing out.
I absolutely agree with that. Not to say, agree with what you said. And, I'm thinking about what Ativa said a little bit earlier in regards to this reimagination process, right? Reimagining the purpose of the VRA, but really retelling in a very, racially coded, not even coded at this point, explicit way, our history. And I would love to learn more about these teaching institutes. But I also think about Justin Hansford. You had an article, the First Amendment is a racial project, right? And so if we think more broadly, right, about fascism, what is that? It's a racial project. It's a racial project of imagining the future. Jasper Burns, who I think is at Stanford this year, describes it as an idea of the future based on a myth from the past, right? And so that makes me think about realism, which of course is part of this panel's approach. And Derek Bell, once said that the challenge of what we do, I think, is to tell the truth without leading us to despair, right? At least to a crippling, disabling despair. But I think we need to recognize that the truth can be freeing in a lot of situations, right? And that CRT can help with this truth-telling to help understand and respond to the drivers of fascism, which, I think we'll get into a little bit more as this panel goes forward. So I think there's the value of CRT, but the difficulty is, opening public consciousness when there have been so many very successful attacks weakening core democratic institutions in this country, right? The judiciary, the media, our courts, our legislature, and so forth. And I want to pose one question to everybody here, but also to the panel, because I think there's a lot of criticism of the state role. And I think there's a question earlier about that. What can states do in this regard, right? And I believe absolutely state rights tend to be sort of rhetorical devices that can be interpreted one way or the other to usually benefit those in power. But is there not a role for, states, localities in adopting policy reform initiatives that can at least directly respond to some of these attacks? I'm thinking about the right to protest in particular, right? The federal interpretation, federal courts, I don't think are going to save us. But states may have a role there, and you could disagree.
This is a fascinating discussion, and coming from a perspective of critical disability studies, I feel like it can be a useful tool to try and unpack some of the things we're talking about, because I've heard a lot of people referencing throughout these past couple days DEI, but I think it's important to remember that it began as DEIA, with that accessibility at the end of it. And what we've seen is this mass destruction of the entire disability infrastructure that's disproportionately impacting marginalized communities. Most noticeably, just this past week, we saw they're going to be rescinding the disproportionality rule of equity and IDEA, and we saw the entire firing of the entire OSER's department as well as OCR, right? And, if we look at disability historians, importantly, Douglas Baton, he explains how disability historically has been used as the justification for the oppression of marginalized groups throughout history. And then we look at the rise of eugenics and the way that HHS and RFK have been weaponizing, once again, eugenics, and the powerful role that we've seen eugenics play in authoritarian structures and, importantly, in white supremacy and fascism. And these linkages become unavoidable. And it's not just targeting communities of color, it's targeting anybody that's being seen as not falling in line with the ideologies, including these LGBT communities that are also being targeted by, educational systems as well, and of course the trans community most noticeably. And it's creating more and more structures that are going to be incarcerating and involuntarily confining people in ways that are generating profit. And so it's turning people's bodies and minds into profit-generating systems for this ruling elite class that they're cementing into our governmental structures. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm just spiraling down my own despair, but I just feel like it's a very important tool for trying to frame the discussion that we're having, because we can't ignore the role that disability plays in justifying these oppressions.
Far from spiraling down, I would say ascending to your own enlightenment in our state. What's your name again?
Kate Caldwell.
Kate Caldwell. So I was remiss in not, and I thought about mentioning something along those lines, but I didn't want to confuse the issues at all. But there's clearly a tie between, the Department of Education was gutted. The way they gut civil rights and disabilities. Very, very straightforward. So your connection, so I just want to amplify what you said. That's all I wanted to do.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how much should we continue to rely on institutions that we're widely acknowledging are crumbling? Kind of piggybacking off of what Kim said and what Justin said, about the shell being left in place. I certainly think that this administration has been very brazen about acknowledging that they don't believe that a repudiation of founding principles and ideals, even the ones that are critical to oppression and subjugation, is wrong, right? That's actually the correct paradigm that we need to embrace as a country. I mean, J.D. Vance calls us conquerors. Well, he's not talking about me. Right, but he's certainly talking about a particular vision of an American. We're conquerors. It's a legacy we should be proud of, right? Our conquests were righteous, kind of thing, right? And so very much far from hiding it, she indicated that we were destroying any sense of public values. I think what they're essentially saying is the most salient public value is white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. It has always been the most salient public value, and everything that is attempting to repudiate and erode that is what's wrong. And we are using this opportunity that we're in power to correct that wrong, right? And we will do so by eviscerating all of the institutions you thought could protect you and advance this deviation and advance this departure from the paradigm. You will watch us make them useless. We will do it in front of you. We will be blazing about it, and we will wait for you to react. And you will watch us use some of the most brutal force in your face, snatching parents out of car lines, going to people's court dates with masks on. I mean, it's mask off, mask on. It's such a weird juxtaposition, the inversion. And so it feels like our resistance has yet to match or achieve any parity with the reality of the way our institutions and the brazenness of this departure or this repudiation of the second Reconstruction is, and everything that's come after it, right? And so I struggle so much because I go to all these conferences and people are like, the Supreme Court is lawless. And also, let's parse every word that they said so we can understand the opinion. And I'm like, these two things don't go together. Something is amiss. Is it just me? And I'm brand new to the space, so maybe it's just me. But I'm trying to figure out, get a job and also fight fascism. Even though your job is kind of beholden to the fascism for the funding it needs to pay you. It's such a, I'm sorry, excuse my French, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's a real mind fuck. And I'm really trying to understand, what we do to meaningfully engage that now.
So that's where I'm going to take the panel, and I want you to just kind of go on with what your next sentence would be, because resistance. We got 30 minutes left, 25 minutes left, right? And there has to be some hope coming out of this weekend. Otherwise, everybody's just going to go home, close the door, and be like, I'm out. Game over, right? So the last 25 minutes, let's focus on that idea of what resistance looks like. And I'm happy to jump into, but I want, like, what was going to be your next sentence? When you talked about resistance, you used the word resistance. What would the resistance look like?
I mean, I honestly think we've yielded too much of our collective power to these institutions. We rely too much on 9 people that are easily corruptible. We rely too much. We should rely more on each other. I mean, we're beholden to, I want to get a job. Yes, God, I want to get a job, right? But also, I think I'd learn more in pop-up classrooms. I'd get better service from pop-up clinics. What does a community garden look like? What does it mean for us to rely on each other and for these institutions to have to be responsive to us relying on each other, because we're so connected to each other, we depend on each other, and we're not so afraid of not pissing off these institutions that they don't have to come to the table. I mean, I want our own fiefdom. I would love for us to just take like either the Midwestern states that are around the lakes, because we need fresh water in the area of AI, or we do a reverse migration and we go back to the South. But what happens when they bomb us, right? Like, what happens when they bomb us, Philadelphia situation?
But we have our own military. I mean, there are enough people of color who've been in the military at the highest levels and the lowest levels. We can do this. Technology, also cybersecurity. We need security from a technology standpoint and from an actual standpoint, so that if we get bombed, there's some.
I don't know. Peter Thiel got all the money and he reading all our text messages. I'm just worried he's gonna send an unmanned drone and
this is what we want, and we're gonna keep it going.
Exactly what we want.
First up, yeah.
This is something that we've been thinking about, or some of us at the Legal Defense Fund, and one idea is to use, like, going to the comment about state and local, entities, is to really focus on the local, because local government has tremendous impact, and local, officials have tremendous impact on people's everyday lives, especially like education, law enforcement, for example, zoning and things like that. And so, and I think one idea was to incubate these kind of localities to rethink about what, racial equality looks like. Because you can pass laws at the local level, right? That can and then perhaps try to anticipate, like, how can we best enforce those laws, or that they're meaningful. So it's kind of like starting from scratch. But the pin in that, and this is something I have a question for, is like 2 things come to mind, right? Is that the cities where we probably would want to do that are in states. There's like this kind of state local preemption that would kind of overcome that. And then also, one of the concerns I had from the Calais argument, and I didn't really think about this, but I think this is like another kind of the seed that's being planted, is that the only way to have any kind of race-conscious remedy, like the only thing that is a compelling interest to overcome strict scrutiny is specific acts of explicit discrimination. And then that, of course, requires narrowly tailoring. So if that's where the Supreme Court's going, anything that is, an effort to advance racial equality, you would have to have like this high standard, right, in order to kind of justify it. And so, how can we immunize these, if we were to create these laws at the local level from, kind of having them be struck down, eventually they're going to be, kind of anticipating what we know is going to happen, I guess, and learning from like what we've already seen. So these are some of the thoughts that, and if other people have good other ideas too, I would.
You, sir, Blue Blazer, go ahead.
So I might just pivot the conversation a bit. Of course, I'm from South Africa, so I just want to pivot a bit to what Professor Barley was talking about, and what Professor Yu was speaking about earlier today, kind of U.S. imperialism and this sort of right-wing fascism that we're seeing at a global scale. And Professor Mokwede, you spoke about this Orwellian equality. Some people have been talking about sort of shape-shifting. So how we see on the question of Palestine, we see how, I think one of the weirdest things that happened this year was the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, where you had all these Western powers commemorating the end of World War II and talking about never again, whilst watching on Al Jazeera a genocide unfolding. And you see CNN talking about the war in Gaza, whilst Al Jazeera is talking about the genocide in Gaza. So we see in the international law sphere, similarly to the domestic sphere, we see this strange, I like your use of Orwellian equality, because I think what's difficult about the current moment is that there isn't really a coherence to this form of white supremacy. It's more that it's like the most bland form of political expediency. So if I have to be red to get what I need to be in this context, I'm red. If I need to be yellow on this issue, I'm yellow. If I need to be blue on this issue, I'm blue. So it's like, how do we resist something that we can't actually really get to the core of what is this system? It just shifts according to what it needs to be to achieve what it needs to achieve.
So sadly, there's precedent for this. I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say, sadly, there's precedent for this. And that precedent, I would say, is the entire Lochner era. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I was going to say, the entire Lochner era, where you have this sort of inconsistency. I mean, we talk a lot about how the Lochner era was problematic for many reasons. That's one of the most problematic aspects of the Lochner era. And I've suggested in the past that with regard to gun rights, we see that going on already, with this inconsistency in terms of what gun rights mean, gun rights for who. We've been seeing it, Justin just left, but we've been seeing it with the First Amendment for a long time, this sort of inconsistency. Free speech for who? Freedom of religion for who? Anytime you see a freedom of religion case, it was brought up on a panel yesterday that you were on. We were all talking about this whole idea that we have this profound levels of inconsistency in that. And what's that consistent with? That's consistent with something that we don't recognize as law. What we do recognize is aspects of what a fascist government would do. And to your point, I mean, I love what you said earlier from ACLU, from NAACP. You made the comment about state and local preemption. I mean, everything you were saying, I hesitate to show this one slide I have about when I give presentations on the subject, showing that there is hope. There is hope. And I'll tell you, in Florida, we literally have a law that talks about how it doesn't just say we must teach the history of African peoples in the United States and beforehand. A mandate to teach the history of Jewish people. A mandate to teach ethnic studies of sorts. There is hope. Because even Florida has that. Is it really hope? Is it really hope? I don't know. And then because when you try to do it, in a state of like Florida, we are one of those states that has state preemption of local law. The governor can literally come in and has done this to leverage some things very recently, came in and said he was going to get rid of the entire council for the city of Orlando, where I live, unless they bowed the knee, bent the knee, and kissed the ring when it came to his immigration raids.
Professor Harris.
So I think this is a key question, and I'm not sure that my thoughts are well organized, but I go back to Cedric Robinson's reminder that these are, as he calls them, makeshift patchwork masquerading as memories and the immutable. And the incoherence that everyone has identified in various forms, it seems to me, is the key feature. The project is not to look for the coherence. The project is to precisely name the incoherence. And to your point about why the parsing of the Supreme Court opinions, partly that's, the methodological disease that comes from law school. There is a historical utility to it, and I'm looking at one of the great historians among us, because it tells us about where the incoherences are. And the identification of the incoherence is not just for the purpose of saying, gotcha. The purpose of identifying the incoherence is to find the theoretical space for reimagining what all of this should be, which actually goes back to your point about thinking, I don't think about the local level as just a geographical space. I think about the local level as the spaces where we are situated, where we are occupied, and looking for, or where we occupy and sometimes are occupied. Probably that was a slip. That they are spaces that are definitely places of where we experience suppression, but that in finding each other, these are moments where we can identify moments of intervention, however small. Because what I think it calls upon us to do is actually theory. I mean, one of the things that somebody was just saying, you know, if it's the shape-shifting nature of sort of a fascist regime, I went back and started reading Mussolini's on the Doctrine of Fascism. Because, and it's a really, it's a telling example of what Robinson is talking about. It purports to present a doctrine, and indeed it is more than just a word. He's giving it in this essay, 1932 I believe it is, the picture of the fascist state and the justification for the fascist state. Why the fascist state is the ultimate expression of, it's almost a religious document. He talks about it in terms of this higher ideal. And yet there's all kinds of contradictions running all the way through it. What's my point? My point is to say that this is masquerade, right? It's masquerading itself as immutable and inevitable. I think, you know, it is a challenge when we are faced with the hegemonic sort of description of reality, Anniv, that you just talked about, the sort of redescription of genocide as though there is some kind of equal parity between parties that are just quote unquote at war, right? It's to the point now where I cannot watch television coverage of this question. I read, I find that I literally, I can't do it. But the point I'm trying to make is it's very difficult when we have these sort of hegemonic structures of the production of information. But I don't think that leaves us without the ability to engage wherever we are and to find those moments, those places, and the people in need of us to advocate, to support, because they're everywhere, right? The needs are mammoth and huge. And whatever tools we have, I think they become, that it helps us become clearer about a theoretical, and I do think it's important to think about this as a theoretical move that allows us to push at the same time that we have to live through it, right? And I don't think there's any sort of magical set of conditions that will do this. I do think it's important for us that the tension that I feel, and this is actually a call for people to help me think this through, which is one, the through line and the continuity, you know, between the sort of features of racial fascism all the way through, right? I mean, we start with sort of a racially fascist state. That's right. At least in this country. That's right. And connecting to Ohani's point, this was not just a sort of local phenomenon here. These are reproduced in different times and places across the globe. Colonialism as a global phenomenon has different forms of this in different places, right? And we carry it through to now, and we say, okay, so this is not new, but there is something new, right? There is something new about this moment. I think Kim was alluding to this fact when she says, you know, now we have moved beyond separate but equal. We've moved back, we've moved to a sort of justification for racial hierarchy. So the question is sort of, why? It's not like the prior regime of formal equality wasn't working for them. It was working pretty good, right? And so the question is, why? I think it's important for us to theorize about why this shift at this moment You know, what does it mean that he is tearing down the White House?
Literally and figuratively.
Literally, right? Why that move? Right. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. But
So-
that was, yeah.
Let me pepper 30 seconds of reactions, and then we've got our friend down here, and then Leo. I agree with that. I mean, Cheryl, you and I have been talking about this for years, right? And I think one piece of this is there is a new need for an identity formation in the internet age and the sort of acceleration of how we know reality, and I think there are folks who see it as an opportunity to engage in this. There is also, someone mentioned it earlier, 2045, right? And that whiteness as this sort of expression of race is going to be, at least from the democracy space, right? We don't have the votes anymore, so we got to rely on gerrymandering in order to get around this, and sort of this naked thing. And this kind of identity and power work becomes a thing, and then it gets recast as this is what the founders wanted anyway, right? This deployment of originalism to justify a lot of the stuff. Well, what would have we done in 1789? Well, I would have been picking cotton in 1789, you know, if I had lived that long. And this gets back to a point made earlier about the perils of what institutions like law schools and the perils of analysis, and we hate the court, but we live and die by their very word. That's because we love the court too, and we're caught in this kind of abusive intellectual relationship with the court, with the founders, with the constitutional text, and we ignore political economy of slavery, and we ignore all of these things, and that reimagining, and at least in my view, has to come from a space where we can look at all of this without loving it because we love ourselves and our communities more.
All right, let's grab the questions we had up here in mass, and then we have 8 minutes left. So I'm gonna ask, get all the questions, and then I'm gonna ask from Professor Sundquist down to answer the questions and kind of summarize again.
I can answer all the questions.
But
we have a queue.
Yeah, we have a queue. Before we get to queue, let me just say one quick thing. One thing that I think has been missing throughout this entire conversation, and CRT, race, and that absolutely is connected to capitalism, right? We have to think about widening economic inequality as one of the drivers of what's the new here, right? And why is this occurring in this particular way? That, if we're thinking about this as being, sort of a symptom of end-stage capitalism, we have to think about racial capitalism generally and what that has been teaching us over the years, right? That is, I think we need to develop a stronger economic justice focus or narrative from a CRT perspective. If we're thinking about building coalitions of people, diverse, social identities, and so forth. I think that's going to be very critical moving forward. But I don't know what the 3 questions we have are going to go into that or not. But
it's less of a question, more. I'm really appreciative of everyone's perspective here, particularly with a lot of professors, and I hope to maybe bring a little bit of insight from students. And Dr. Harris, you talked about Cedric Robinson, and remind me your name, sorry?
Rashaya G.
Rashaya G. You talked about what can we do, community gardens, small things that can be done. And remind me your name, sorry?
Ohini.
Ohini?
Ohini, yes.
Talked about Palestine. In the larger conversation of fascism here at UCLA, we had students speaking out in the encampment against the genocide in Gaza. And the institution called in police and other students, rival students, sent students to the hospital, beat up students, broke bones, and those students were paid in a settlement afterwards by the university to do so. Students here called out a genocide. Other students sent them to the hospital, and those students were paid. And in thinking about Cedric Robinson, my understanding of the sort of last 3 chapters of Black Marxism is that Du Bois, C.L.R. James, and Richard Wright, the first 2, I kind of understand him saying they get caught up a little bit in getting to the Black radical tradition in their position of the petit bourgeois, and that Richard Wright, as living not in that economic space, sort of gets there sort of right away, or more directly, or I don't know how you want to put it, but students this morning, law students, were out helping with Westlos Rapida, rapid response with ICE, getting groceries to community members affected. Last week, there were law students who ran out of classes because there was a report of ICE on campus to help respond. There are law students who are doing patrols currently within West LA to get hotline numbers out, which has been successful in stopping people being kidnapped. And so if there's anything I'm going to say to kind of connect all of these points together, it's
students are the answer.
There's a lot that you all offer constantly, and there's a lot that students are doing as well. And I would really look towards that and plug in that because there's a lot of beautiful stuff here. So.
Last question from the audience, and you guys have a minute.
Just 2 quick question-ish comments, annoyingly. First is, white supremacy from its born was a global project, but sometimes we always think about it as a domestic problem. I think the situation right now, I hate to be a bomber, is America sort of reap what you sow. Because for the longest time, you would continue to elect those people from local all the way to the top. Those people who would support your right, but then support a genocide outside your doorstep. You think that's what never happened to you, right? And then guess what? Elon Musk is a foreign national, came here to tell you he's a white supremacist, and he wants to tell you run your politics. Peter Thiel is an immigrant from Germany, I think. Everything is a circle now. It's just our turn, and we're not ready. And the second is, I think, response to Rishal's comments. Like, I think we need like 10 symposiums on to apply the abolitionism scholarship on Supreme Court specifically, because that is the idea that we talk about abolish a bunch of things, but it sort of stopped at Supreme Court. We don't really talk about that. Why not? And we go to a abolitionism symposium. We can abolish like the system. Like, what is the system? Like, let's pick up like one thing. What do you mean by abolish police? What the hell does it even mean? Where's the ringleader? Like, we need to abolish the ringleader in a meaningful way, then we can go next. But of course, that would probably never happen. But 10 symposium will put them on notice to at least make them like afraid of a little bit. All
right, Professor Sunquist, you got a minute down the line.
I actually want to go to you because I know you had, yes.
My question's quick. I just wonder, how could CRT be used to build power in communities in this moment? We've kind of touched on some little things, but I just kind of wonder what you guys have seen of like CRT being used to put forward some positive solutions of resistance.
Okay, Professor Sunquist, you can answer that and keep going down the line.
I'll be very quick. I mean, I think we're seeing some of that already at a very local level, and I forget, Henry? Yeah, Henry was speaking a bit to this already, right? If we think about we're educators, right, by and large, although many of us here actually litigate really important issues as well. But there's a consciousness raising, and I think that's one value of CRT, and, every hallmark of CRT, the principles that have been honed over the years speaks directly to this moment by and large. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. I actually, and I'm going to ask you for the 4th time, what was your name?
Rashaya. My name is whatever you want.
You had a really good, question earlier that I've been just struggling with for a while, and I've been struggling with it for like at least 10 years. And that is the role of, the master's tools, essentially, in responding to this situation. And, I think one, classic CRT insight has been, well, there's value in using rights rhetoric, right? Even though we know that it is shifting in nature, and that courts will interpret it in ways that only preserve power by and large. And I've been struggling with that, right? Because I still think there is value in, utilizing constitutional principles to even secure, small wins here and there. I've certainly seen that in my own practice. I used to do more immigration practice, and so you got to hold on to those small victories. But more broadly, my faith has been shaken a bit in terms of, is this going to move us forward? And I'm not sure it will.
All right, so when you said quick, you didn't mean it.
That was quick.
All right, Professor Redo, Makwede, you got a minute because we are all bust up time.
Okay. Attacks on education are attacks on our very humanity. You see our humanity under attack right now. And to respond to your point in terms of what should be done practically, I think I'm going to push back on something you said earlier. I don't think we need to talk about hope. I don't think this is a moment to give people the Disney version of being hopeful, because that's typically what people outside want to hear. Like, it's about to be a kumbaya moment. We joked about this earlier, right? We're not going to end with kumbaya. We need to end with as has been said by others long before me, we need to end this with a fierce urgency of now. I'm an educator, so my response is to educate. Others, and I have also been a litigator, and my response has been to litigate and to use their tools where I could to do so. Whether it's for pro bono litigants who are doing First Amendment work or immigration work. I have great empathy for what you've been doing. I never did it at the level you have, so thank you so much for your continuing work in this project here at UCLA. But all of you, we have to find our own ways to push back and to dream of something better. Because I don't believe that we can take comfort in the idea that in 4 years everything's going to be all right. I think we have to engage with the idea that there's a possibility that we may not live to see that mountaintop. Others have lived through far worse with far less hope for something better. So let's not focus on hope. Let's focus on the fierce urgency of now. What needs to be done? Next time someone tells you, okay, give me a positive message, tell them Trump's in office. What the hell are you talking about?
Chill me with this. I'll be quick. 30 seconds.
Oh, no, I never said
7 minutes later. I told you to get away.
Y'all are arguing through my time. Y'all are arguing through my time.
You're talking through your time now.
It's my birthday. I get to finish the seminar, all right?
I'll let everybody know it's his birthday today.
And if you want to go to happy hour at 5 o'clock at the hotel, we can keep going there. But in the 17 seconds I have left, there is a possibility. I almost said hope, but I'm going to say a possibility in the fact that a lot of this is illusion casting, right? We believe in, like, my university president likes to say that, well, executive orders have the force of law. Not when they're enjoined, Mr. President. I had another M word in mind before that. But suffice it to say that, and I think the recording stopped by this point. But no, that's a choice. That's my point. That's a choice. We fight with the law where we need to. We build communities so we can live through it. We do follow the urgency of now, and we theorize for better tomorrows in order to create the path for the people who go beyond us. And the one thing I'll add is that politics haven't stopped. Right. Jamil Bowie, the only New York Times columnist that I keeping up with, because he consistently roots things in history and understanding the cyclical nature of all this stuff, points out that politics haven't ended. The funny thing about the regime is that the regime still needs the perception that it's popular in order to accomplish what it can do, because that feeds into the inevitability. So there's all kinds of resisting that we can do through all the tools that we have picked out in order to frustrate that, including, I'll add to the list, the vote. despite all of the pessimism, still at the end, remember, Trump is the most unpopular president in the era of keeping polling, right? For his second term, particularly. So that stymies progress. That might wake up some people in Congress. That might stem people to organize and build those community gardens, or to reconsider the value of the court and maybe talk about state constitutional solutions, or wake up in the morning and think about a better method. Whatever that might be, that possibility is there for all of us, and we need to seize it now.
All right, moderator's prerogative, I get to finish up. Professor Harris, to answer your question, why? Why now? The same answer people ask, why did I climb the mountain? Because I can. Right? Why now? Because they can now. Right? The Derek Bell history talks about the only reason they made the move because they had to. Right? The rest of the world was watching. Things had to be modulated for order capitalism to take off to all things. Couldn't do what we wanted to do back then. We wanted to keep it like it was back in 1865 before then. Well, we couldn't. We had to make this move. Why now? Because we can. Because we can again. And I'm going to push back on the Areto's pushing back on me. When he says, I'm not going to use the word hope. And in his answer, he used the answer, we should dream of something better. That is hope. So you can call it what you can, but it's this idea of maybe we won't get it in this time. And I'm going to finish with, I think it's all about the students, as Rashaya said, right? This is all about the students. And part of my time during the PhD program, one of the books that I still go back to over and over again is by James D. Anderson, The Education of Black Folks in the South, 1860 to 1935. And this is a book that's grounded in this idea of hope, dreaming of a better tomorrow. It's about being in this kind of space where I have to believe it was worse than it is for us sitting here right here, because we can sit here right here today. But they were dreaming of something better tomorrow and basing on a hope, but they have actions, and I don't have time to go into actions, but read the book, and there's actionable things that they did to create the promise of tomorrow, and that's why I think we hope and dream and build on this resiliency idea. So thank you for attending. Thank you.